So this is part two of Hypothesizzle, Esports, and then working it out. In the first part, we've defined the three psychographics. So we have Benny, he's the spectator. We have Joey, the socialite gamer. We have the third one, Peter, the tryhard. Or Peter, I mean, there's all sorts of T words you can put in here, including toxic. Oh, I'll leave it up to you guys. But we're gonna explore this in a little bit more depth over here now in the second part, right?
Yep.
Okay,
All
so
right.
how did they get here? And when we talk about the evolution of esports, this is why I was so interested in this topic when I first brought it up. Is there's a cat in the background. The reason why I was so interested in the evolution of esports is because of the fact that when I was playing Magic the Gathering, I saw this change where you had people who started playing the game when they were teenagers and say it was a saga or whatsoever, and
Yep.
then a couple of years later, when you started to reach Lorwyn and Shadowmoor, or in fact, Shards of Alara was where you saw the big change from Wizards of the Coast, where you saw these teenagers become working adults. And with working adults, there's this change in terms of user behavior, in terms of consumer behavior, where the amount of time to play the game was less, so they spend less time hanging out, but instead they had a very they had this increase in spending power. And Wizards of the Coast introduced this thing called the Mythic Rarity system. So before Shards of Alara, for those of you who don't play Magic the Gathering, or fine, I'm just going to explain this, okay? So in every booster pack, there's a rare card. And a box contains 36 boosters. And on average, last time, there was no additional rarity system. But they introduced this to say that in every box of 36, there's going to be about, I think, 3 to 5 mythic rares. So it's a 1 in 6 chance that you get a card of this rarity.
Yep.
And they
Which is
introduced
higher
the,
than the rare card, and it actually replaces it pretty much.
yeah, so it's like I can say it's gacha or whatsoever. But that was the one change that they made. And on that set onwards, once they released the system, Magic the Gathering made a transition from a game where you could kind of play as a teenager working a part-time job or whatsoever, and then you scrounged up like pocket money to play the game. And a top deck back in the day before this change, right, was in Lorwyn. You could buy it for about 300 to 400 at most, and this was the most expensive deck for $400. Right after this change, you're seeing these decks of the same number of cards, and it will cost 3 times that amount. You're paying $1,000 to $1,200 to get a top tier deck for Magic the Gathering,
Yeah.
and
Um. Yeah, I would think that was probably also the period where they kind of like redefined their game more of like a children card game into a adult card game in a way.
so I mean, I always said that Magic was always designed with a very high fantasy kind of design. It was never really a very children's card game that was very specifically marketed or appealed to children. I mean, if you look at specific sets, those are very mature themes that they're dealing with.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I would
Uh,
I would never really say that this was a card game designed for children, but it was picked up by people who were tied, and then you saw this transition where the time went down and the money went up, and with the spending power it created this economy that had this drastic change in the game. And esports, we are starting to reach this point as well, right? We are season 8 of Worlds, and we're almost at a decade since, as we mentioned at the start, since the GSL days, and we're starting to see these people who were playing these games in their time in college, who were playing these games for Singaporeans for their national service, and they're moving into a period where now most of us are working adults. So most of the people who played League of Legends since season one are probably university students or working adults today.
yeah.
Most of the people who played StarCraft 2 are most likely going to be working adults today as well, simply because of the way that gaming interacts with these kind of things, or at least on the more serious scale. And it was very interesting for me because for me, when I was in school, I used to have a math teacher who was actually he used to be a national champion for Magic the Gathering. It was always very interesting because his time being a national champion was at least a good few years gone before he became a math teacher at my school.
Uh,
But I would still see him at the big events, and he will always, if we would say hi to each other, he'll always tell me that don't tell your parents that you saw your teacher over here. It's these kind of small funny interactions, but increasingly now that his generation has been there for Magic the Gathering, and now I think for us, we're kind of the digital generation. We're moving into the space, and there's going to be this explosion of working adults with expendable income in the esports field, where we have this seeded idea of esports within us as well. And let's go back to the psychographics. So for Benny, we talked about how we played Dota 15 years ago. Now, I mean, you brought your brother as an example. What was the transition for him like from one point where he used to play Dota, and I think he was semi-serious kind of like at playing Dota, and how was that moving forward for him?
I guess things really started to change when he really like okay, like for guys in Singapore we do have the national service, right? So that's where it kind of dipped already. Where he can't play as much, because he's stuck in the army camp like 5 days a week, and then he comes home. The only time he gets to spend is like not as much as how he used to be as a student. And then of course, upon getting out of the army, he's gotten like a very full time job. He's too busy. Never really had the time to so called spend as much time in the game. But his I'll call it loyalty to the game in a way, like the whole nostalgia factor, because he's been playing it for so many years. So even now when he's not really playing it as much, but he's still pretty very invested in like in terms of esports, being the consumer of like watching the TIs and even like just watching streamers play the game, and that's how he pretty much derives his entertainment in a sense as well.
Did he buy the battle pass for TI?
I would think he did. I mean, even like for my case, like I mean, I am older than him, so in a sense, like I guess the demographic is about the same as well. So I used to be like play very competitive, spend a lot of time and money in it, and then as time goes on, I tend to watch a lot more streams. It becomes a norm where I just come home, I turn on my computer, one monitor will be on Twitch, and I'll be watching some games, and then I'll be doing my things on the other screen. And there was also, of course, the period of time where I would just buy BlizzCon like the virtual tickets almost every single year. Like I sometimes I don't even like watch the whole thing, but like due to like nostalgia or be it habitual, I would just buy it, get the nice in-game stuff, and just like watch it. That's about it.
So it's about cashing in for the nostalgia for the psychographic, right? And we saw the evolution of somebody who was seeded in these kind of things and in an early age, and then as they made this transition, and we're looking at entertainment choices, right? So for this
Yeah.
person, uh, in terms of trying to get the attention of these people, we're comparing it to other types of entertainment products.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about fandoms and stuff like that, it is about which can better capture the attention of these people of this psychographic. So as to what allows Benny, the spectator, to watch
Mm-hmm.
a stream for esports as compared to watch a say I don't know or one of the thousand shows out there or simply just watch traditional sports instead. What do you think is the secret sauce in that? Do you just think is that this person needs to have played this game at this point of time, or is there a way to aid the transition along?
I would think it's pretty much of a behavioral loyalty in a way. Like it's been sort of indoctrinated into them over the
So
years.
we don't question it. It just happens, and these people are the people that we want to target slightly down the road, right? Slightly further
Yeah.
down the road.
I mean there is the difference between attitudinal and behavioral loyalty, right? Where
Hmm.
the behavioral one is pretty much more on like because it happens so regularly. It's kind of like I wouldn't call it blind loyalty, but it's kind of like a affection built over time, as compared to attitudinal loyalty, where it's pretty much of like there is like a specific reason, like because the product is good or they really like it, or basically something that they feel very positive about in a way.
Okay, so let's move on to our second psychographic, right? So when we talk about uh Joey, right?
Yeah.
We contextualize it as a mom and stuff like that. That's the same thing. Be it work, be it our commitments or whatsoever. This is somebody who continues to use games as a social medium. And
Yeah.
how did this behavior evolve over time?
Mm, I mean, like what we discussed earlier, right? Like, like how we used to have the institution where there is no, like, in a sense, no hierarchy system, so everyone's kind of equal. You go there, you socialize, and pretty much gaming as a platform for Joey's case is like the new replacement platform as she gets to adulthood and gets busy with her own life, and despite not really having a lot of time to meet people in person, there is still like a platform for her to still interact and meet these people online.
Yeah, I think that so when we talk about designing for these kind of people, right? When we talk about designing for Benny, the spectator, I'm actually looking at like the evolution of like this is somebody who has less time and he probably wants to spend the time, whichever time he has, dedicated to a hobby in a much more meaningful way, in a much more perhaps even extravagant way, and I'm just looking at the possibility of say perhaps the future of esports might be in the offline engagement portion for it, about creating fan experiences that just go past it. And when we look at our parents' generation, when they consume sports, we see a lot of the pay-per-view. It's like online was supposed to be a technology part of how it revolutionized pay-per-view, and it did revolutionize pay-per-view in a way that was actually very detrimental to the pay-per-view model. It made piracy so readily available. Like I mean, just look at soccer nowadays. I mean, you go to either Ronaldo7.net or whichever website it is, and then
Yeah.
I don't even know if that's an actual website, by the way. I don't even watch soccer, so that's just something that I randomly saw someplace somewhere, and it's like I came up with that, but um. I'm not that I'm endorsing piracy, but piracy is a consequence of the internet and streaming today. And
Yeah.
as such, right, when we talk about creating viewer experiences, when we talked about viewer experiences for the working adult, the traditional thing that we went back to pay-per-view is no longer a viable thing. And so perhaps the future for spectators should be in the offline portion of it, about creating offline fan experiences. And then when we talk about the social gamers, right? And I think that this is where in our pre-conversation where we talked about it and we brought up that actually I think that Riot Games has done a very good job of identifying how can we engage these group of people better. The people who regularly play only say once or twice a week because of as an adult that's just what happens. You have a very routine schedule, and
Yep.
given that routine schedule, you only have say maybe an hour or two to play every week or so, and you don't really want to play that and during like the stresses of the rank queues and stuff like that and the hyper competitive side of it. But you can get to engage with a fun competitive game in which you can take the same elements and then you play in a PvE or whatsoever in a more collaborative experience. So let's move on. Let's move on to our dear friend Peter. And
Peter.
when we talked about Peter, this might be someone say this guy needs help. But the big question here is how can esports help Peter? And this is where we'll be right back with part number 3.